As Joel mentioned, you got to really get your accountability down, your time management down, learn how to shuffle things well, and then also find time for yourself. I know that people think, like Josh, you mentioned, you can just sit around and watch cartoons and kind of screw off all day. But I found with remote work that actually a lot of times I end up working more. And I think companies are starting to discover this too.
Yeah. Well, for me, I was growing up, I was a do chores last, play first kind of guy. So I would always say, I'm going to hang out with my buddies first and then do my work. And it always bit me in the ass because around like 7 p.m., my parents were like, all right, come home and, you got to get some stuff done. So I structured around, okay, first thing I'm going to do is get everything I can done so then I can go and enjoy the day and be spontaneous. And that's what I really like about remote work is that I have that personality type, obviously coming from addiction where I kind of just like to
All
go
or
off
nothing.
all or nothing.
Yeah.
Yep. And then going off whims. So kind of just flowing with the wind. I appreciate structure and I definitely have structure, but if I had to snap my fingers and choose one or the other, I would choose to just be able to do whatever I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want. So that's kind of the approach I take is like, I want to structure it so I can do what I want when I want. However, I am going to be disciplined. We come back to that word. It's a very important word, discipline in getting the things done, because at the end of the day, even though I'm working remote, I am still being of service to another person. So I am still technically working for another human being. And in that sense, it's very important that I show up and do the work. So, and I know Josh, you've talked about this a lot too, in that discipline. So, I mean, for yourself over 17 years, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, you have to find a good balance of discipline that really works for yourself, because one of the traps you can easily fall into is you can just kind of get into a great flow and then you wind up like really overworking yourself. There can be psychological ramifications where it's like, hey, if you're working from home constantly, suddenly when you're at home, you're like restless. Sometimes for some people, it's like, hey, I just need to be in a different space where I go to a coffee shop and I can work there, or I spend 1 or 2 days a week where I go to a co-working space, get work there. So there's that psychological separation of like, hey, home is where I like rest. Out there is where I work or where I do work. That's where oftentimes a lot of people that have, remote working situations, they have like an office in their house, which is, this is my dedicated working space, because you can blur your lines psychologically pretty quickly. So you can, turn your house into more of like a unnecessary stressful environment. And then another thing that you also want to be more careful and cognizant of is, as well as making sure that even though you do have like a lot of flexibility, you don't abuse that flexibility to the point where, again, whoever you're working for or your clients, right, it starts to suffer or starts to impact there, right? So for example, right, you're working remote, it's great. Suddenly, hey, it's a really great day outside. It might be really nice to like go up to the beach and hang out and just chill and relax on the sand. Well, that's all great and fine. But, if you decide that you're going to, be completely disappearing and vanishing, right? And then you're on the beach and then you come back and you have like 3 missed calls because, there was an emergency or something came up and people were trying to find you. Then that's where, again, you can work yourself into a really interesting situation, right? So you want to make sure that you do have that proper communication channels established where it's like, hey, whoever it is you're working with or whatnot, it's like, hey, I'm taking the next 4 hours where I'm going to be, unavailable. So if something emergency does pop up, here's the call me directly on my cell, I'll answer it. But again, just making sure that, you give the proper communication channels, because oftentimes it does feel a lot like, oh, I'm up, I'm working, I can do whatever. Okay, great. I'm just going to like, shut the laptop down and just go zone out for the next 5 hours. Well, there are still people that will depend and will rely on you. So, making sure that you maintain discipline around effective communication with your team. That's a real easy thing that people can overlook in the beginning stages of just trying to get used to remote work.